Hello students, today we are going to look at a particular novel, a portrait of the artist as a young man, written by James Joyce. This novel was published in the year 1916. We have to keep in mind that James Joyce was an Irish writer. So Irish politics during that era also becomes a very important feature of the novel. The novel is written in the form of a Bildungsroman. A Bildungsroman captures the essence of character growth of the main hero Stephen in this novel and his understanding of the world around him. This novel also shows us the religious and the intellectual awareness and development of Stephen DEDALUS from a young age to his adult age. Stephen DEDALUS is considered by critics to be a fictional alter ego of the author James Joyce himself. And his surname Daedalus is an allusion to the skilled craftsman of Greek mythology. Why has James Joyce selected Daedalus to be Stephen's surname? We are going to know more about this in the later slides. The novel captures Stephen's growth as a person, finally his becoming an artist, his exile from Ireland, his birthplace, and his going to Europe. He leaves Ireland for France in order to fulfill the highest purpose of his life, that is, to become an artist. This novel was published in the year 1916. When James Joyce was writing the novel, Ireland was under the rule of the British. Ireland's self-oppression really concerned the author. Through his fictions, Joyce wanted the Irish people to be aware of themselves, to be aware of their culture and their society, and to not be caught up in their own ancestral conservatism and Catholicism. In the portrait of the artist as a young man, which is set in Dublin in the late 19th century, Daedalus, the main character, rebels against what he sees as the pervasive, repressive influence of the Roman Catholic Church and the provincial attitudes of his own family member and of Ireland as a nation itself. Irish politics occupies a very important place in the novel. It forms the major background of the novel. The Irish politics shapes the personal and artistic growth of Stephen. The important character to mention here is that of Charles Stuart Parnell. Parnell is not a fictional character, and he actually does not appear as a character in the novel. He was an Irish political leader. He was a polarizing figure whose death influenced many characters in the novel. During the late 19th century, Parnell had been a powerful leader of the Irish National Party, and his influence had seemed to promise Irish independence from England. But when Parnell's affair with a married woman was exposed, he was condemned by the Catholic Church, and he fell from grace. His fevered attempts to regain his former position of influence did not prove successful, and it contributed to his death from exhaustion. Many people in Ireland, such as the character of John Casey in Joyce's novel, consider Parnell as a hero and blamed the strict, rigorous church for causing him his death, while many other characters, such as Dante, thought that the church had done the right thing to condemn Parnell for having an affair with a married woman. Parnell represents the burden of Irish nationality that Stephen comes to believe is preventing him from realizing himself as an artist. When
When
James
James
Joyce
Joyce
was
was
Stephen Dedalus is the protagonist of the novel. Stephen, while growing up, goes through a long phase of hedonism and simultaneously deep religiosity. We see this continuous conflict within this character. Eventually, Stephen becomes self aware and adopts a philosophy of aestheticism, greatly valuing beauty and art, and becoming the artist that he was always bound to be. Like we have discussed, Stephen Dedalus is essentially Joyce's alter ego, and many of the events of Stephen's life had mirrored the events from Joyce's own youth. Stephen's surname is taken from the ancient Greek mythical figure Daedalus. Daedalus was also engaged in a struggle for autonomy, that is, freedom. Joyce gave his hero the surname Daedalus after this mythic craftsman who devised the labyrinth for King Minos of Crete and who created wings of wax and feathers for himself and his son Icarus. The narrative technique of the novel is very interesting. It mixes both third person narrative technique with free indirect speech until the final chapter where we get to hear Stephen's voice. Joyce employs the first person narration for Stephen's diary entries in the concluding pages of the novel. This has an important implication. This suggests that Stephen has finally found his own voice and he no longer needs to be absorbed in the stories of others. Joyce fully employs the free, indirect style to demonstrate Stephen's intellectual development from his childhood through his education to his increasing independence and ultimate his exile from Ireland to Europe as a young man. The style of the work progresses through each of its 5 chapters as the complexity of the language and Stephen's ability to comprehend the world around him increases. The book's opening pages communicate Stephen's first stirrings of consciousness when he is a mere child. But later in the novel, the language becomes more sophisticated with Stephen's growing individual awareness. Throughout the work, language is used to describe indirectly the state of mind of the protagonist and the subjective effect of the events of his life. The novel employs the stream of consciousness technique, which was a very innovative method first beginning in the 20th century. It aims to depict the totality of experience through the human consciousness. The stream of consciousness technique was brought to us for the first time by Marcel Proust in his Remembrance of Things Past. Other authors associated with widespread use of this technique are, other than James Joyce, Dorothy Richardson, William Faulkner, and many others. The use of stream of consciousness technique necessarily means a retreat from the direct portrayal of social interactions, a reduction of the outside world to a mere object of the subjective awareness of the hero. Unlike the narration of objective circumstances, Stephen Daedalus's awareness is shapeless, undramatic, and it is unable to contribute its own form and order to the novel. Therefore, this form and order must necessarily be imposed by the novelist because the impression of an unconnected stream of thoughts which this kind of novel aims to produce must have an artistic unity, which is an indispensable necessity in any artistic creation. In this regard, the most important tool used by the stream of conscious novelist for attaining such unity is the use of symbols or system of symbols, which connects the diverse threads of the thoughts of the hero into an integrated whole and imposes a thematic unity to the unconnected strands of thought of Stephen Daedalus. The novel makes extensive use of a system of symbols. A symbol may be defined as anything which signifies something else, and the significance of which becomes evident through mental association or tradition. H. Abrams, in his very popular book, A Glossary of Literary Terms, classifies symbols into conventional or public and private or personal. The former are developed in the consciousness of an entire culture through several generations and include symbols like the cross standing for faith and Christianity, rose standing for love, and dove standing for peace. The latter are symbols whose associations and meanings are developed by the individual author and must be understood in the context of his work alone. In this novel, we find the very potent image that is of a bird. And this bird image is linked to the major figure of Stephen Dedalus, who gets his name from the Greek mythic character Daedalus. Stephen's alienation from his family results in a search for a father figure, a person who will be his mentor in his search for a vocation. This search comes to a rest on the mythical Daedalus, whom he begins to consider his real father, the father of the spirit, not merely of the blood. Let me now tell you a little about this Greek mythological figure Daedalus. Daedalus was the great artificer, flying away from captivity. He becomes a symbol of his own release from the captivity of his nation, language, and family, and of a life devoted to art, to a total expression of the self, like Stephen Dedalus. The other two important symbols in the novel are the girl wading in the sea that Daedalus sees at the end of chapter 4, and also the character of Emma. The girl wading in the sea, the way she is described, she is bird like, she is absolutely free. It is this bird imagery that pervades the novel from the very beginning and continues till the end, symbolizing whatever is beautiful and free in the consciousness of Stephen Dedalus. Emma appears only in glimpses throughout Stephen's young life. She becomes a symbol of pure love. Stephen worships Emma as the ideal of feminine purity. When he goes through his devoutly religious phase, he imagines his union with Emma in heaven. It is only later, when he is at the university, that we finally see a real conversation between Stephen and Emma. Stephen's diary entry regarding this conversation portrays Emma not as an ideal feminine figure, but as a real, friendly, and somewhat ordinary girl, but certainly not the goddess that Stephen had earlier made her out to be. This more balanced view of Emma mirrors Stephen's abandonment of the extremes of complete sin and complete devotion in favor of a middle path, the devotion to the appreciation of truth, reality, and beauty. When certain ordinary things are repeatedly referenced in any work of art, they become distinctive elements in the design and have a symbolic effect. These repeated references are called motifs. A portrait of the artist as a young man also has several motifs. The color symbolism used in the novel becomes one such running motif. Maroon and green are the colors used repeatedly in connection with Ireland politics. Stephen associates the colors green and maroon with his governess Dante and with the two leaders of Irish resistance, Charles Parnell and Michael Davitt. In a dream after Parnell's death, Stephen sees Dante is dressed in green and maroon as the Irish people mourn their fallen leader. This vision indicates that Stephen associates the two colors with the way Irish politics are played out among the members of his own family and the country. The color white, departing from its usual connotations of purity, virtue, represents coldness and lack of emotion, particularly in connection with priests and religiosity. The color ivory or cream is represented as a warm color, being related with emotion and vibrant life. The cow is another motif used in the novel. It can be taken to represent Ireland. The novel itself begins with baby Taco meeting a cow while walking down along the road, in the story that his father tells his little son. Stephen's attitude to his country is paralleled with his attitude to the cows. The cattle, which had seemed so beautiful in the country on sunny days, revolted him, and he could not even look at the milk they yielded. Similarly, Stephen could no longer bear the religious hypocrisy and the narrow attitude of Catholicism of Ireland, and he escapes to the freedom of Europe to become an artist. Quite as significant is the repeated reference to heat and cold in the novel. Beginning with the wetting of the baby Stephen's bed in the very beginning of the novel, when he first feels warm and then cold, it continues throughout the chapter in the uncomfortable coldness of the square ditch in which Wells pushed Stephen's, leading to the heat of the fever which this incident resulted in. It finally culminates in the third chapter in the heat of hell, and the fourth chapter in the coldness of priesthood which was offered to him. These feelings of hot and then cold simultaneously bother and affect Stephen Dedalus throughout the various phases of his life. All these symbols and motifs act as an unifying agent in the novel, which would otherwise have considered or been consisted of only loose images and experiences in the consciousness of the hero. As discussed previously, Ireland was under British rule during this time. It was Ireland's self-oppression that really bothered James Joyce. He wanted the Irish people to see themselves and become aware of their own culture. This theme occupies a very important place in the process of the personal and artistic growth of Stephen Dedalus. It is presented right from the beginning of the pages when baby Stephen memorizes the colours used by his aunt to allegorize the Irish politician and Parnell. To the end when a grown-up Stephen is leaving Ireland and assuming his responsibility to create a conscience of his Irish race. Joyce uses an identity concept linked to the term race. Stephen Dedalus writes in his diary entry of April 26th, "Welcome, O life! I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race." Assuming in this way the need to combine the encounter with experience with the forging of the conscience of the race, that is, with all the social and political implications. Throughout the text, a dialectical process of assimilation and confrontation of Stephen with his own Irish identity takes place. On one hand, Stephen Dedalus is politically committed to his nation. He feels concerned about the future of Ireland, defends the existence of a differentiated Irish identity that longs to be independent, and defends the use of art for that purpose. But on the other hand, he rejects any form of regressive conservative nationalism, as this would only eternalize the present situation. The recognition of the importance of his nationality in his art, where he says, "This race and this country and this life produced me. I shall express myself as I am," is definitely a tribute to his native land. Stephen defends that a prosperous future for Ireland and its culture could not be built from a subordinate position to the culture and politics of United Kingdom, but neither from an ultra-conservatism Catholicism anchored in the past. Stephen chooses the life of aestheticism, truth, reality, balance, and that of the middle path. Stephen Dedalus's successful journey to self-awareness and self-realization is the hallmark of this novel.